In, Dustin Smith, Jabari for three, and the win. Yeah! He got it!
We are here to Fuel Rockets News. This is the Rockets Fuel Podcast. Of course, I am your host, Lashard Binkley. You can always find me over at Twitter, X at Binkley Hoops. You can find my written work over at the Dream Shake or SB Nation. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about three free agents coming up in the next offseason that will help the Rockets with their lackluster three-point shooting. As we know, the Rockets have been one of the worst three-point shooting teams the last 4 seasons. They were dead last year, only shooting around 33% from three. This year, they actually improved, which I guess if you could say 35% is an improvement. They improved to 35%, which is still below the league average, and that's why they were bottom 10 in the league in three-point shooting last season. They only finished 23rd in the league in three-point shooting. We saw during their 11-game winning streak when they were actually shooting well, we saw them actually win the games. That's why one of the main reasons why they were going on that winning streak, of course, along with Jalen Green's great play. But for the most part, the Rockets struggled throughout the season. Players like Alec Burks started off really fast from three-point range. For a while there, he was shooting over 60% from three-point range, but he started kind of coming back to the pack of where he was previously in his three-point shooting. Fred VanVleet had a pretty good year from three-point range. But overall, I mean, the Rockets really did struggle from three. Jabari Smith struggled. Jalen Green he was up and down all year from three-point range. For the most part, he was in the lower 30% as far as three-point range. They will get back Tari Eason next season, who he was one of their better three-point shooters. And he missed the majority of the games this past season. So, yes, that ultimately will help. Hopefully you get even more from Cam Whitmore, who honestly, if we're just going by form, he definitely has the best form as far as three-point shooting on the team. So that would definitely help. But ultimately, Rockets still needs to add another player that can help their shooting. But something to keep in mind, we all know the Rockets will not have a lot of minutes to give out as far as even if you're going with their current roster, even let's say you move on from a Jae'Sean Tate or even a Jock Landale to try to clear up some cap space. You still don't have a lot of minutes coming because, like I said, Tari Eason is going to be commanding definitely over 20 minutes, some games 30 minutes a game. So that's something that you got to keep in mind when you're talking about bringing in players that's going to help the Rockets. And like I was saying in the last podcast, I don't think they need to make any major moves. So we're talking about more minor moves or players that don't necessarily have to be the top player or second option, or even the third option. They're fine with being a role player that can ultimately help the team, that can step up when they need it, but he doesn't have to be the guy. And that's where these three guys kind of fit into that category. And I think that's why they're three realistic players the Rockets can bring in. Because, of course, you got players like Klay Thompson, but let's be honest, Klay Thompson, even with him struggling this past season, he's still going to be asking for probably north of $25 million a year, even in his declining play, he's still going to be asking for around that amount. And that's something the Rockets absolutely do not want to pay. You'll have people like Paul George, who's going to be a free agent, and that's going to take, you turn away several players just to be able to fit him under the salary cap. So, like I was saying, three realistic players that I think the Rockets could actually go out and get. The third person on the list, to me, is the most intriguing. He may be the hardest to bring over, but to me, he's the most intriguing out of anybody on this list. But let's go ahead and kick off. And I want to start with my first player on the list, and that is Malik Beasley. Malik Beasley is currently playing with the Milwaukee Bucks. He's, of course, in the playoffs right now. With the Bucks, he helped them come away with that game 1 win. He went 3 of 7 for three-point range. And he also was a plus 11, which was the best of any bench player on either team. Malik Beasley is also a type of player. He can occasionally get his own shot. He can also occasionally get to the basket. He's kind of a multi-level scorer. He's not really just a three-point scorer, but he is really good, especially this past season from three-point range. He shot over 41% from three-point range last season, which was his second best of his career. The only other year he actually shot better was the 2019-2020 season, but he only played in a handful of games that season. So this is really the best full season or close to full season that he's had from beyond the arc. And when you're thinking about it, yes, Malik Beasley gets a lot of those wide open shots because he's playing with a Giannis, playing with a Damian Lillard. But if you look at the Rockets last season, there was a lot of players getting a lot of open shots because teams were double teaming alperensengun. They were double teaming Jalen Green towards the end of the year. So you're going to get those open shots. You're going to get those Jabari Smith open shots, and Dylan Brooks are getting open shots. Any player that they bring in will get those same type of opportunities because the Rockets now have players that other teams are starting to game plan for by double teaming them. And also another thing the teams are starting to do against the Rockets. What they were doing a lot this year when the Rockets had it cooking on the offensive end, guess what they would do? They would go to the zone coverage. They'll go to the 2-3 coverage because they figured that's a way to slow down the Rockets offense. And guess what? It did. Majority of the time, the Rockets struggled against the zone because they couldn't make open shots. They really only made open shots for the most part in that winning streak, and that's why they had that winning streak along with the great player Jalen Green. But for the most seasoned teams would go like clockwork to the zone, and the Rockets couldn't beat the zone because there's a couple ways to beat the zone. Get the ball in the middle of the court, make the defense sag in on you, and then the other way is to move the ball around and get it and find an open shot from the perimeter. The Rocks will move the ball around, but then they'll get that shot from the perimeter and they'll miss. And play like Malik Beasley, who I said shot 41% from three, which is, pretty amazing. I know there's a lot more players now that are shooting over 40% from three-point range, but anytime you can shoot over 40% from three-point range, especially when the Rockets shot as a team 35% from three-point range, that makes a big difference because, like I said, the Rockets don't have a lot of teams that are really good shooters, or a lot of players that are really good shooters, excuse me. And when you can add in a player like Malik Beasley, who doesn't have to be the number one option, who can be that role player, who's fine being a role player, who doesn't need to necessarily always have the ball in his hand, that makes a huge difference. And also another thing to keep in mind with Malik Beasley, he only made $2 million last year. Now, yes, he's going to be asking for a lot more in this upcoming contract. We all know that. He's not going to be asking for $2 million in his next contract. But I don't think it's going to be unreasonable what he's going to be looking for in the open market. And again, we really don't know what these players are going to get because it's all dependent on what other players in free agency get. So we really don't know that right now. We can only go by what they had last year and how they played this past season. So yes, he may be. He's definitely going to be asking for more than that $2 million. But I know the Rockets don't necessarily have a lot of room under their salary cap. But like I said, they can move on from some players like Jayshawn Tate, who they can trade him away. He's making around $8 million a year. Jock Landale, even though he played great, and don't get me wrong, he'll be a great third center. But if you do need that cap space, you can move him because his contract is not guaranteed after this past season. So you can move on from him, and you also have that money as well. So there are ways for the Rockets can make that extra money, and they also have the vet minimum as well. So there are ways for the Rockets to bring in players like I have on this list and not necessarily break the bank. So Malik Beasley is definitely somebody I think that would be a really good option for the Houston Rockets, especially coming off the bench behind a Jalen Green that will give you that shooting and that scoring off the bench that the Rockets definitely need. The next player on the list, not necessarily a household name and didn't necessarily finish, haven't had the greatest finish to the year with the New York Knicks, and that's Alec Burks. He's kind of fallen out of the rotation, out of Tom Thibodeau's rotation in the last month or so of the season. But before, when he was playing with the Detroit Pistons, he actually shot really well from three-point range. Before he was traded over to New York Knicks, it seemed like he kind of struggled with the Knicks because the Knicks also play a totally different type of game than a lot of other teams, especially on the offensive end. They didn't have Julius Randle, so they didn't necessarily have the post player that can draw double teams like an alperensengun. Jalen Brunson had the ball in his hands a lot. He wasn't necessarily drawing double teams. So it wasn't as many open shots for the New York Knicks, and I think that's why Alec Burks had trouble kind of fitting in with that team at the time. But like I was saying, even with him struggling with the Knicks from three-point range, he still shot 38% from deep for this past season with the combination between the Detroit Pistons and also the New York Knicks. So he did still shoot, fairly well from three-point range. He's shooting over 38% from deep for his career, which is also, when you're thinking about it, the league average is around 37%. So another reason I put Alex Burks on this list is because he's not necessarily going to be looking for anything crazy as far as salary, especially coming off of struggling this past season. And he is 32 years old, so he is past his prime. This is probably going to be more than likely the last contract he's probably going to get, at least the last contract is not going to be a league minimum. So I don't think necessarily he's going to be asked for anything too crazy. He made around over $10 million last season. I would think he's probably going to be getting less than that this upcoming season. So he would fit in perfectly. If you do move on from a player like Jayshawn Tate, you will have that space. And depending on how much the vet minimum will be, or the veteran exceptions the Rockets will have, they can also fit him into that slot as well, because it may be less than $8 million. But Alec Burks, like I said, he is a really good mid-range shooter, a good player, a shooter as far as from beyond the arc. He's also a good defensive player. Even though I know, yes, I'm talking about offensively, but he's also somebody that can help you on the defensive end as well. Like I said, he shoots over 38% for his career. He's had a few seasons before this season where he shot over 40% from three. So he would definitely be somebody, again, that can play off of a Jalen Green, that can play off of an Alperen Sengun, especially late in games when teams are trying to play a zone or giving up those open shots from three-point range and other people are struggling on the team. You can stick him in the game for several minutes, and maybe he can give you two or three three-pointers that will help break open the game or help get you back in the game. So he's definitely somebody that I think the Rockets, and honestly, probably out of all the three on this list, he's the most realistic that the Rockets get with their current salary. And then also the fact that he won't need a lot of minutes as well, because like I said, the Rockets are not going to have a lot of minutes. They struggle to find minutes for players, even with Tyrese and not being in the lineup, even with the Steven Adams not being in the lineup. So the minutes are definitely going to be even harder to come by this next season. So when you're thinking about bringing in players, I know some people are like, who are these guys? You have to think about how they're going to fit with the team. What role are they going to be willing to accept? And are you even going to have the minutes for these type of players? So in the minutes you do have, are they going to be willing to accept those minutes? So that's something you got to keep in mind when you're talking about, hey, I want to bring in this guy or bring in this guy. Well, where are they going to play? So NBA players, for the most part, don't just like coming over and just sitting on the bench the entire game and not playing, especially when they still have something to give to a team. So that's something to keep in mind. That I think Alec Burks, that's one of the reasons why I think he'll be a really good fit, because his salary will be manageable. You can actually probably fit that into what you already have as far as salary cap. And he's probably more likely to willing to accept a lesser role, because any player the Rockets bringing in, it's not a major trade. They're going to be taking a lesser role more than likely than they have with their previous team. So he is definitely somebody that I think the Rockets should keep in mind if they're talking about trying to improve their shooting, which they absolutely need to this upcoming offseason. The last guy on the list, and probably the guy that's probably less likely that the Rockets could get for a couple of reasons, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's currently playing with the Denver Nuggets, who, of course, won a championship last year with Jokic and the Nuggets, and who for the past few seasons has been one of the better two-way players in the entire NBA. Again, I know we're talking about three-point shooting, but he's definitely also one of the better defenders in the league as well, which would be a huge plus. He's shot from this past season. He actually shot from like 3 of the last 4 seasons, he shot over 40% from three-point range, which is pretty amazing. And he only played with Jokic last season, so you can't necessarily say, well, he's playing with Jokic. And yes, I know he played with the Lakers as well. But the fact that shooting over 40%, like I said, with Malik Beasley, that is a huge deal. He shot over 40% again this season as well. Almost 41% from downtown. And another reason why I find him so intriguing is because he does play with Nikola Jokic, who, like we've heard a million times already, Alperen Sengun is compared to a lot. So that's something that, he knows how to play off a big man that's a really good passer, that draws double teams, and he'll fit in well with a player like Alperen Sengun, who's a really good post player, who draws double teams, and is a really good passer. So he already knows how to play off those type of players. And I know, yes, it's not extremely difficult to play off for really great players, but it's not always an easy thing. Some players just don't know how to get in the right spots. They don't know where certain guys like to pass the ball, or what certain guys' moves that they make, that, hey, they may be making this move, but they're not going to shoot the ball. They're going to pass it out at the last second. And that's something that you see from players like Jokic and Sengun, because they like to improvise a lot. And that's good that he's played with those type of players, and he'll definitely play with that type of player like a Alperen Sengun here with the Rockets. And also, he brings over the championship pedigree. He has that experience in the playoffs, something the Rockets are going to absolutely need if they're trying to make that push for the playoffs next season. But I mentioned earlier that he's probably more of a long shot than any of the players, because he made over $15 million last season. He's probably going to be asking for that or a little bit more this upcoming season. And also, he has a player option, so he may not necessarily even opt out of his contract. I think he will, because he'll be making around $15 million again next year. I think he probably wants to test the free agent market. But he is a chance that he can just accept the offer and then play again for the Denver Nuggets next season. So that's another reason why it may be a longer shot, but I don't necessarily think it's out of the realm of possibility. Because again, The Rockets can make some moves to make some more room under that salary cap. But if out of the three players I listed here, Pope would be absolutely the number one option because, again, I don't necessarily think he has to be a starter. He is a starter with the Nuggets, but I think he would be fine coming off the bench, playing a role on a team like the Rockets that are an up-and-coming team as well. Um, but again, you have to factor all those things in. Does he want to leave a team that's competing for a championship every year? Does he want to necessarily opt out of his contract this past season? Maybe the Nuggets even work out a deal with him before even his free agency. Who knows how that's going to work? But if we're just looking at players that can potentially be free agents, that aren't necessarily superstar level players that you're not going to be able to afford, Pope would be the number one guy on my list as far as players that you would want to bring over that can help your team. That's a really good shooter and is a really good locker room guy and is one of the top role players in the entire NBA. Like I said, 3 of the past 4 years, he shot over 40% from 3. So those are 3 guys that I think would be really good fits for the Houston Rockets as far as helping their shooting because they didn't necessarily address that issue last offseason when they were talking about bringing in players to improve their team. And yes, like I said, they improved a few percentage points, but they definitely need to be in the top half of the league when it comes to three-point shooting if they want to make that push into the playoffs next season. Because we know to win in the NBA, you got to be able to shoot from the outside. That's just a simple fact of the matter. You can get away with not having great post game. You can get away with maybe not being the greatest defensive team in the league, but you got to be able to make shots from 3-point range. And that's something the Rockets have not really done the last 3 or 4 seasons. And I think the 3 players I listed here are realistic guys that can possibly help the Rockets. And of course, there are other guys out there that, in free agency that may also help the Rockets as well. But these are the 3 guys that I think that can possibly fit into what they will have as far as salary cap space and also will fit into a role that they'll be able to accept and not necessarily have to be a starter coming in for the Rockets next season. So that's going to do it for today's show. We appreciate all the support as usual. We won't have, as course, much content and much stuff to talk about in this upcoming off season, because, of course, the Rockets aren't playing right now. But we will have some more content coming up for us when the Rockets open up their new training facility. Like I said in the last podcast, we'll definitely be out for that one. Also, if there's any moves that are made before the trade or before the drafts come up, and of course, when free agency hit, we'll have all that news as well. So that's all stuff to keep in mind we'll be doing during the off season. I also plan on doing some more player profiles. Old school players, like thinking about doing a show, profile about Otis Thorpe, some of the more forgotten players that a lot of Rockets fans may not know about because they're too young, or maybe they just forgot about altogether. So definitely plan on doing that the offseason. So we'll still be having content coming at you throughout the next few months. So, and like I said, we appreciate the support. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think? Who are some players that you would like the Rockets to possibly bring on that can help them with their poor shooting, that can help improve that next season? Somebody that you think that the Rockets can realistically go after. Who would you like the Rockets to? Doesn't necessarily have to be free agency. It can be through a trade. Who's some of the players that you think the Rockets should be trying to bring in this offseason? Please let me know down in the comments. Like I said, I appreciate your support. And make sure you check out the next episode of the Rockets Fuel Podcast.